Good evening. How are you? My name is Adela Pineda Franco. I am a professor of Latin American Literary and Cultural Studies and the director of the Teresa Lozano Long Institute of Latin American Studies at UT. On behalf of the Institute and its partnership with the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection, led by my colleague Melissa Guy, we, Lilas Benson, are delighted to welcome all of you here for a special address by the Honorable Michelle Bachelet Heria. We are very honored that President Bachelet was able to take time out of her busy schedule and join us today to share her vision and ideas with us. I also want to extend our warm welcome to members of the higher administration. Dean of the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs, J.R. DiSciasso. Vice Provost and Director of the University of Texas Libraries, Lorraine Harricombe. And Senior Vice Provost of Global Engagement, Sonia Feigenbaum. Today's lecture is part of the Marianne Faulkner Distinguished Series in Latin American Public Affairs and Politics. The series is named in honor of Marianne Faulkner, former First Lady of UT during the period 1998-2006. Her husband, President Larry Faulkner, made the growth of Latin American studies and collections at UT a centerpiece of his term. We honor his legacy with this series, whose aim is to address issues of broad import relevant to Latin America and the world. We are especially happy to welcome Larry and Marianne as well. I also want to welcome the members of the Lilas Benson Advisory Council and former directors, associate directors, chairs of Mexico centers, managers and chief of staffs of Lilas Benson. My special thanks to Paloma Diaz, who I think made this event possible. Michelle Bachelet Heria has been a key figure in the process of Chile's democratic consolidation and a global leader in the pursuit of social progress. Bachelet, who experienced closely the political violence of the Chilean dictatorship, has dedicated her life to the pursuit of democracy, human rights, and women's rights. She became the first woman to hold the presidency of Chile in 2 non-consecutive terms, enacting an ambitious agenda in the areas of education, tax reform, and constitutional and electoral design. As president, she was determined to pursue equitable development, greater integration, sustainable energy, and democratic stability. Her victory as the first woman president of Chile is without doubt one of the milestones in the history of this country. President Bachelet first gained public relevance as Minister of Health and then as Minister of Defense under the presidency of Ricardo Lagos. A surgeon and pediatrician herself, health has been an important part of her life. As Minister of Health, she enhanced the healthcare system and improved the labor conditions of health providers. Her appointment as Minister of Defense is also a milestone of special relevance not only for Chile, but for all of Latin America, since she was the first woman in the region to assume such a position. After President Bachelet's second term, she served as United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights. Earlier in her career, she was appointed as the first executive director of the United Nations entity for gender equality and the empowerment of women. She traveled the world promoting women's rights and nonviolence. Michelle Bachelet has certainly expanded the voice, leadership, and participation of women and has considered gender equality a central element of her vision. At a conference on Latin American women in Quito in 2007, she expressed the following thoughts, which I paraphrase in English. I'm sorry if my paraphrase is not that good. Being a woman means relating to others with the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes. Such feelings are at home in the private sphere. Deploying this ability in the public field is a new adventure, sometimes hard and difficult, but tremendously rewarding. The challenge of modern societies is knowing how to integrate male and female views into a whole. For men, what matters most is the outcome. For women, the process of that outcome, how this outcome is achieved and at what cost. It is therefore essential that more women reach the public domain. When a woman comes to politics alone, the woman changes. When many women enter politics, politics changes. And clearly, one of the challenges and needs of our democracy is to improve the quality of politics. Michelle Bachelet's remarkable career as a global leader makes us all so very proud today. President, we look forward to your remarks, after which we will have time for a discussion moderated by Dean DiCiasso, a distinguished scholar on clean technology policies and policy design to enhance environmental equity. Dr. DiCiasso served as the founding director of the Luskin Center for Innovation at the University of California, Los Angeles, prior to coming to UT as the 12th dean of the LBJ School of Public Affairs. And now, without further protocol, please join me in welcoming President Michelle Bachelet to the podium.
I have to clarify, I didn't brought them. Huh? This is natural. Well, first of all, dear Dean G.R. DiCiasso, dear Director of Teresa Lozano Long Institute of Latin American Studies, Dr. Adela Pineda, and afterwards I will say all protocols observed, dear friends. I'm delighted to be with you here today at the University of Texas, an institution with more than 140 years of history. I want to thank the Lilas Institute and the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection for inviting me to talk about one of the topics I cannot stop talking about, women's leadership and gender equality in the Americas. As former president of Chile twice, with extensive experience in international roles such as Executive Director of UN Women and United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, today I would like to talk to you about my vision of women's rights challenges and opportunities in our region. But first, let me mention a bit about the context in which we find ourselves nowadays. We live in an era of great transformations and thus great uncertainties. Democracies have been threatened worldwide. Russia invaded Ukraine more than 2 years ago. The Hamas attack occurred more than a year ago, and the humanitarian conflict has meant the loss of 42,000 Palestinian lives. And it has spread through other countries like Iran and Lebanon just a couple of days ago. 2023 was the year with the most armed conflicts in the world since 1946. And so we're living in times when instead of human rights being reaffirmed, they have been threatened and called into question in various places. This, of course, should alarm us and concern us. Who do you think is at most risk at losing their rights in adverse circumstances? The most vulnerable population. Vulnerable not because it's biologically vulnerable. It's because of the marginalization, discrimination, and exclusion of their rights and the possibility to access to services. So we're talking about namely women and children. Hillary Clinton famously said in Beijing in 1995, and I quote her, "Human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights." And we cannot forget that. Women have rights just as men have rights. And we're not asking for anything else than what is fair and what men have always had. And this is crucial because it's not just a women's issue. It's a human issue and a cornerstone of democracy and to the progress of our societies. The importance of achieving gender equality has no parallel. Our world will not accomplish its full potential. We don't harness all that we can contribute with our ideas, vision, and experience. When it comes to human rights, to women's rights, our sexual and reproductive rights are often called into question. Men have autonomy over their bodies. Why shouldn't women have the same right? Women should be entitled to make their decisions. Autonomy over our own body should not be up for discussion. So this is one of the aspects where we have seen setbacks recently in various parts of the world. For example, here in the United States, when Roe versus Wade was overturned by the Supreme Court, putting an end to the constitutional protection of abortion, we had been a right for women since the 1970s. We have also seen this in Argentina, where the government has eliminated the Minister of Women and prohibited the use of inclusive language in the public sector and prohibited the use of the word gender perspective in the different documents and discussions. So this will undoubtedly mean a setback for incorporating gender perspective in analysis, in the studies, in the research, etc. Or we can mention Afghanistan, where girls cannot go to school, women cannot speak in the streets, and of course, or they cannot work, to the, I would say, the extreme setback. But we can have so many examples in many places of the world. So how can we ensure that the progress we have made won't be reversed by the next government that doesn't believe in human rights for everyone, men and women, in any country of the world? So we must defend and promote the universal principle of equality with women and men upheld in the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women since 1979, as it still remains at the forefront for efforts. So I would say that in the case of human rights, but in particular women's rights, we have taken for granted a lot of advances on human rights and women's rights, and the truth is we shouldn't take it for granted, because there will always have people who are trying to set back these rights. So we need for that to be able to happen. We need to build social support for gender equality and human rights. We need to legitimize gender public policies across our society so that setbacks regarding women's rights are not tolerated. And we can never give up, as there will always be forces seeking to undermine our rights. Another right that is often threatened for women is the right to live free from violence. Gender-based violence, I mean violence directed against women simply because they are women, is one of the main obstacles we face worldwide. According to the latest available data from ECLAC, over 4,000 women were victims of femicides in the Latin American and Caribbean region in 2022. 1 in every 8 women and girls aged 15 to 49 was subjected to sexual or physical violence by an intimate partner in the previous year. And one way to address this is by implementing domestic violence legislation. And I'm talking about implementation, because there are a lot of countries who do have the laws, but they don't have the resources, they're not implemented, so it makes no difference. Countries with such legislation, according to UN Women, have lower rates of intimate partner violence at 9.5%, compared to 16.1% in countries without it. But one special area that I want to mention as well, because it has become more and more frequent, is political violence against women has increased, particularly online and offline. In terms of online, they seek to amplify existing social biases and stereotypes in order to disenfranchise women and underrepresented sectors from participation in governments or civic life, through online abuse and harassment, or doxing, or through disinformation campaign. So I would say, and this is something that is really concerning us because it has been increasing and increasing. For example, last study that I saw, that was a couple of years ago, In the European Parliament, 40% or more of female parliamentarians have been threatened from, all kinds of threats, including of rape and also of killing them. So this is something that is increasing, and we need to to look at it. There's a lot of research, there's a lot of information, because many women are deciding not to continue in politics because they feel fear for that. But so despite significant strides, progress on gender equality remains slow. Before coming here, I reviewed the latest UN Women publication called Progress on the Sustainable Development Goals, the Genders Snapshot 2024. Their conclusions are not very encouraging. The report finds that the world is still falling short on its commitment to women and girls. With just 6 years left before the 2030 deadline, not a single indicator under Goal 5, which focuses on gender equality, has been fully achieved. The problem is that what everybody knows is that if you achieve gender equality and all the contents of all the parts of the SDG 5, it will be detrimental not only on women's rights, but also on the overall achievement on the 2030 agenda. And it directly affects the lives of women and girls worldwide. So we need to convince people in our countries that a world with gender equality is not just the right, but the just and right thing to do, but also the smart thing to do. I would like to address the importance of women's leadership to face all of society's challenges. Women are underrepresented in leading positions, not only politically, but also in the private sector and even in the academia. Advancing women's participation in decision-making is key to promoting gender equality. We need more female political leaders, but I have to say, not every woman has a gender perspective. I have been to Davos many times, and I had dinner with women from companies, and one of them told me, you know what? I'm successful not because I'm a woman. I'm successful because I'm good. So I answered to her, look, I was elected president because I'm good, but because I had the privilege to be elected, I need to ensure that many other competent and capable women have the same opportunities. So you don't have that every woman have this gender perspective. So it's not only about being a woman. Of course, women who have been under, I would say, discrimination and have lived the situation are more comfortable or more close to understand the situation. But anyway, we need more female political leaders to improve policies and ensure people understand that women's political participation benefits societies and strengthens democracies. Because women represent half of the global population, and therefore, if I would say, half of the potential of the world. So therefore we bring half of the talents, capacities, and abilities needed to be leaders and agents of change. We also have the right to participate equally in democratic governance. This is something that women usually accept. They nod when I say these things. But I remember when I was at UN Women, and I was invited by the IPU, the International Parliamentarian Union, because the head was a Swedish guy, very involved in gender equality. And I was there talking to all these men from the Arab world, from many places, and some of them left the room, of course. And then I had a meeting with Latin American parliamentarians. The only reason they had this meeting with me is because I was former president. So I was speaking all of this, they were so bored, really, the men. The women was excited, yeah. So I decided to make a little game with them. I said, because I think they're not listening to me, so I finally said, look, if you work with women, if you take their demands and you do things for them, they're going to vote for you. And so they told me, oh, you could have started that way. That would have been enough for us to convince us. Of course, it was a game that I did because I saw that they were almost sleeping. But what I realized is that sometimes the narrative only on the rights for some things is not enough. So that's why I understood that I needed to speak about that it was the just thing to do, the right thing to do, but also the smart thing to do. So talking to my country, who is a soccer lover, I developed like an analogy saying, and we were in the America's Copa, and also afterwards the Centennial Copa. So I would say to them, look, and we won it, both. But that was the last time, I'm sorry to say it. So I would also, I was thinking, what can make men who are machist think that really is important? So I will always tell them, our team wouldn't win any matches with just half of the players. So the challenges that Chile is dealing with needs both of them, all the men and women on board. But women have not historically had the same opportunities to reach the same positions as men. Despite the push for positive legal reforms, no country has all relevant laws in place to prohibit discrimination, to prevent gender-based violence, uphold equal rights in marriage and divorce, and guarantee equal pay. In some places, they have a fantastic legislation. I've been in countries who have really good ones, but they don't implement any of them. So it's not only about having the law, it's fundamental, but also to ensure that this has implementation. Women tend to prioritize different issues than men, such as children, family, public health, and the environment. That doesn't mean that we don't speak about economy, international relationships, and anything. But also, and I'm talking about, for example, the local level, in the territories. We have seen in India, where they elected, many years ago, 1 million women at the local level, and they will bring other issues to the discussions of the local municipalities and so on. But I think also their own experiences that are different than men bring a new perspective to the table when public policies are being discussed. And also they can also show and discuss the obstacles for women and how you can find solutions not in abstract to the real problems. So that's why it's so important to have more women in parliaments. According to the UN Women data, gender parity in parliaments may not be reached before 2063. And in terms of parity on economy, I think it's like 2090 or something like that. I mean, many of us won't be alive by then. Globally, in 2023, women held 1 in every 4 seats in parliament. That is 26.9%, up from 22.3% in 2015. And 1 in every 3 seats in local governments, representing 35.5% last year. What evidence shows that introducing gender quotas boosts shares of female parliamentarians. In countries with legislated quotas, we find 27.2% of female parliamentarians, while in countries without those quotas, only 23.2% are female parliamentarians. So in my second term as president, we enacted a law which established a gender quota for candidates to achieve a more balanced composition in Congress. To be honest, I wanted to achieve parity in terms of elected candidates, meaning 50% women. Unfortunately, we couldn't reach to that agreement, neither in my own coalition. And when I asked one senator, I knew him very well, why are you against this? And he said to me, because if one of you come into parliament, one of us has to go. The truth is that he was right, because Salvador Allende's daughter won and he had to go. But anyway, so we couldn't reach that agreement, so we established a requirement of 40% women candidates on party list. Nonetheless, that was not perfect, that was not what I was looking for. It allowed us to increase the representation of women. So we went from 35 seats occupied by women in the previous parliamentary term to 54 in the current term in the lower house, which represent 35.5%, and in the Senate, the 13 women senators made up 26% of the total. Still low, but we advanced. But if we look at governments, according to UN Women as of June 1st of 2024, there are 27 countries where women serve as head of state or head of governments. And recently, Claudia Sheinbaum became the first female president of Mexico, and this is historic for Mexico. Sheinbaum. And now you could have your first female president if Kamala Harris wins the election in November. This would be historic for this country and also for the world. This is one of the most important countries of the world. So it would set a great example for girls and women everywhere. Kamala Harris has stated during the campaign that she would be someone open to dialogue, who listens to the people and leads her country with their interests in mind. And I mention this because sometimes people ask us and ask me if I believe in a feminist leadership. Well, what I do believe is an empathetic leader. People who can put themselves in the shoes of other people, who can understand their problems. It can be men as well, but not every man is an empathetic leader. And I'm not talking about one specific countries, I'm talking worldwide. So I think a empathetic leader is a leadership style that brings together reason, brain, but also emotion. And that's what human beings are. We have both things. So women are more inclined to listen to the people, but also to other women, and give them a voice. According to the evidence, women can even make a difference in peace talks, making it easier to achieve agreements and making them more lasting and sustainable. There were some studies some years ago with the role in women in LA police force, and they said at that time, maybe it's changed, that women were very good, for example, in a case of domestic violence in LA. They were very good negotiators to go there and to try to solve the problem through a peaceful way. But again, not every woman is the same. We all are different. But we need more women in office, but we also need more women in managerial positions. Despite accounting for 40.1% of total employment in 2022, women held only 27.5% of managerial positions globally. Research has correlated higher net profit margins for firms and lower CO2 emissions with more women in decision-making. Women are essential to our economy. In Chile, for example, the central bank estimated that care work, which historically women have done and don't get paid for, represents 25% of our GDP, even more than some industries like mining, metallurgic, etc. And the latest UN Women report stresses the high cost of not investing in women's rights. Closing the gender gap in education and skills could add $10 trillion to the global economy. Thus, including more women is not only the right thing to do, but the smart thing to do. In the Americas, we are confronted with significant challenges that involve women, such as inequality and migration. According to Clark's latest social panorama of Latin America in 2022, income inequality declined to lower levels than before the onset of the pandemic. And I will quote its report. It says, the Gini inequality index was lower than in 2019 in 9 of 12 Latin American countries. That means after the pandemic. Huh? This progress occurred in a context of very high inequality, with the top decile receiving 21 times as much income as the bottom decile. That's the end of the quote. Moreover, wealth was even more concentrated. The assets of the region's 105 billionaires represented 4% of the wealth of the entire population in 2021. So structural problems persist, such as high levels of informal employment and marked gender inequalities. According, again, to ECLAC estimates, nearly half of the workers in Latin America and the Caribbean, so we're talking about 121 million people, were in informal employment in 2022. But when we examine the women's labor market participation, we see that the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020 disproportionately affected women and set the female labor force participation rate back by 18 years. Additionally, women's presence in the labor market has not significantly reduced their engagement in unpaid domestic and care work. I remember when I was a minister, I woke up very early. I didn't have domestic help at home. I would, of course, shower and so on, and then I was going to make my kids go up, prepare the breakfast, prepare the meal for school, for the lunch, etc., etc. I was Minister of Health. So when I arrived at 8 o'clock in the ministry, I had been working for already 2 hours. My undersecretary, he was a gynecologist, very nice person. He had breakfast at the bed. He had a shower, and then he was taken by the driver to the office. So he came fresh. Well, I was already exhausted. But I mean to say, some people will think, okay, poor women. No, you can be a minister and you can have the same condition. I think that the burden of care work, which has been historically unequally distributed in our region, with women staying at home taking care of children, the elderly, and sick relatives, or people living with disabilities, is a persistent challenge. And it's key to promote the social co-responsibility of care reduce its burden on homes, and move towards systems that guarantee care as a right. In many countries, Uruguay, including Chile, we're working on this regard to develop a care system that could support women so they can really be able to do all the things they need to do. Investing in the care economy could create nearly 300 million jobs globally, according to the UN. When we look at another issue, education, in terms of years of education, women have surpassed the average for men. 67.4% of women had completed secondary education, compared to 60.9% of men, according to ECLAC 2022. So all this data is on the region. The proportion of women accessing and completing higher education also exceeded that of men. But despite these advances, the participation rates of women and men show a difference of 23.8 percentage points in 2022. One other important issue is artificial intelligence. It's a pressing issue that poses particular risk for women. According to recent data, 3.7% of women hold jobs that can be replaced by AI, compared to just 1.4% of men. Well, I was in Washington last couple of weeks ago and at the IDB, and the IDB did a work and particularly focused on US and Mexico and analyzed what would be the impact on jobs of the AI. And they did it for 3 years, 5 years, and 10 years. And it really impacts much more women because of the kind of women works. I mean, they work much more in office, in administration, in areas that can be easily being replaced by AI. Of course, there are other issues when people have to deal with emotions that are more complex, that a machine won't do that. It's more difficult, being women or men. But it's a really interesting study to look at it, how there will be AI, what will be the effect on jobs. And in some cases, we'll replace them. In some cases, they will need to be reshaped. Mm-hmm. But also, one thing that we work a lot in human rights on AI is that AI should, all the platforms and so on, should be including the human rights perspective from the beginning. Because many times they develop a technology, they develop a platform, an application, and afterwards they discover that affects and violates human rights. And they have used a lot of money in that. And we work with Silicon Valley a lot on this. But the problem with Silicon Valley, and it's that the majority of the developers are men. I remember going to one very important company. There were 80% that were men, and from them, the majority white men. Latinos were only 4%, but of those Latinos, only 2% were developers. And Afro-descendant, only 2%, but also from them, only 1% were developers. So the problem is that produces bias that are not conscious. And as a matter of fact, I'm not sure now if it was Amazon or another company who started using one of these applications to recruit personnel, and suddenly one of the researchers, there was women and Afro-descendant women, realized that the application was completely biased against gender and against Afro-descent. Because we discussed a lot with this with developers, and they said, look, a robot will have no bias, but the robot doesn't have ethics either. So the thing is that, what I mean to say, I believe that it's very important. Artificial intelligence can bring a lot of opportunity, but it can bring a lot of challenges that we need to take care of that. In particular, in violation of human rights, because I was invited to Canada by a small company who was creating a robot soldier. And they were concerned. A company has given that they won that contract, but they were really concerned about the issue that a robot may not have ethics to define, or who defines the ethics for the robot. So in terms of migration, many times it occurs due to conflicts which leads to displacement, with women and children often being most affected. The same happens with disasters and emergency situations where women, again, not because they're more vulnerable biologically, it's because they have, first of all, they take care that everybody's safe before they leave or so on, and also they have less access to protection, to services, to options. Furthermore, these circumstances are key risk factors for women's physical and mental health. But another challenge for humanity as a whole, and I know that Dean maybe will like this, is the triple planetary crisis. Because in the UN we need not spoke about climate change, because climate change is one aspect, but it's also the fact with pollution, because pollution is producing a lot of early death, and but also the biodiversity loss. Maybe the discussion whether COVID-19 was an accident or a creation or whatever, we will never know. I believe it's a zoonosis because I'm a medical doctor and we have seen zoonosis in many places, Hanta, Ebola, and so on. But the thing is that one of the things is because we are interfering with nature and we are losing biodiversity. So we need to be aware of this. So according to UN Women, by 2050, climate change may push up to 158 million more women and girls into extreme poverty, an increase of 16 million compared to men and boys. So because that seems so ugly, let's talk about some opportunities for women. We have limited data on SDG 5. Thus, we cannot know all that we need to know about gender inequalities, which makes it impossible to take them into account in policies and decision-making. In the 6 years left until 2030, meaningful progress demands commitments to measure gender data, because if we don't have data, we risk leaving people behind. Universities such as this one have a crucial role, because we need professionals with a gender perspective that can create and research the necessary data. Another opportunity is to consider a concept that maybe the academia was very well known for many years, but it was not very used. It's like intersectionality. The COVID-19 virus shows us how different people can be affected. So we discovered something that probably was very old, is that in the COVID-19, again, not because they were biologically inherently more vulnerable, it's because of the lack of access to what needs to have to prevent or to respond to COVID-19, that women, all women, of course poor from the rural areas, but also living with a disability, and also people on the move, migrants or refugees, also LGBTI+, and also people with loss of mobility, like, for example, people in prisons or old people in this home care and so on, they have much more vulnerability. And I said women because even though I don't know the last records information, but when it was everybody looking at this, women could infect themselves as anyone, but they die less than men for many years. I don't know if that was the final discovery, but there was something there. Even there was some jokes, You know that women, we are XX and men are XY? And some researcher would say the part of the Y that is missing, that is what gives women more capacity to respond. So I'm not sure, but it's funny, because they said that in this part of the X that we have and the men don't have, sort of we duplicate our defense capacity. I don't know, I have not researched about it, but I found that interesting. So what I mean to say is that, and I think many countries, and I don't think the US is different from others, they do know how many men and women there are. They probably know, of course, age, etc. They might know, I don't know if they have exact information on how many people living with disabilities are in the country, maybe rural versus urban country people, and probably an estimation on how many people are from the sexual diversity, and many people, and how many poor, etc., etc. But I'm not sure how much information there is on the places where policies have to be made and make decisions, has the connection between this. If we know how many women, old women, living with a disability, poor in a rural area, etc. So the problem with that is that we're leaving behind the ones that are already behind. So we need to think in this intersectional point of view, because otherwise we're not going to have the results we need to live in a country with better conditions for everyone. We must shift the current trajectory and dramatically accelerate progress on gender equality and women's rights, because this will benefit not only women and girls, but entire societies. So we need everybody working together towards this goal: governments, global leaders, activists, youth, academia, and civil society organizations. We need women, but also men on board. We need the 52,000 diverse students and the 3,000 teaching faculty from the University of Texas. We need everyone's commitment so across our diverse continent, we can keep stepping into leadership positions, breaking barriers, and reshaping our communities. And some days when you are a president, or when you are a woman, or a High Commissioner of Human Rights, not every day is sunny. Sometimes you look at the world around you, and maybe it happens to many of you as well, and it's not very sort of, wow, this is really, we're making a difference, and we have great perspective. But I always use words that Desmond Tutu used to say, and he say, I'm a prisoner of hope. And I also use always the same, I'm a prisoner of hope. Because I think when you lose hope, you better go home, shut the light and sleep or something like that. Huh? So I hope that we will keep working together towards gender equality, because it's the only way we can strengthen our democracies and make a more just and peaceful world. Thank you very much. Should I stay here?
Well, it's a great honor to have this opportunity to be in conversation with you. At the LBJ School of Public Affairs, we have the opportunity to host the LBJ Women's Campaign School, which teaches women how to run for office and manage campaigns. And so you are a role model to all of our students and alums. Let me start by asking you a somewhat personal question. We've heard about all the impressive roles that you have played and the impact that you have had. I want to ask you, what motivated you as a person to go into politics? You were trained in medicine. You could have become anything you wanted to. Why politics at a personal level?
I guess it's because I couldn't help it. In terms that I was raised in a family where certain values were given to me, in terms that we all, men and women, deserve the same opportunities, the same rights, and that we could make a difference if we care, if we're part of trying to make things better for others. So in the school, I was always the head of the class, organizing people, organizing activities, school activities. And I have a family that was really, they were not politicians. My father was a general of the Air Force. My mother worked at the University of Chile. They had ideas, of course, political ideas, but were not politicians. But I was raised with those values, and I think that helped a lot to say, you need to care. I always say that the antonym, I don't know if antonym in English as well, of love is not hate, it's indifference. So I was raised to not be indifferent. And I think that's what I couldn't help myself. I started seeing, and I was very dynamic, active, I wanted to do things, and that's why I decided to study medicine, because medicine could bring better conditions of life to people. I love science, but I also love people and humanity. So I thought this was a career that could bring both things together. But then I realized that you're not going to change dramatically things. Before going into medicine, but this is a joke because I was married to a guy who was an expert in HIV. So our discussion was, your research on pneumocystis carini is not going to change the world, but public health can change it. But of course, it was joking ourselves. So we need both science, pure science, and also applied science. So I think that's the reason, because I was raised in a family who care. So I care, and I think, some people can decide to transform, to do something through religion. But I decided that the only way to do things was through politics, because that can make you be involved in the more structural causes of issues. And to try, of course, to identify which are the causes of inequality, of discrimination, of marginalization, etc., and to try to think what can work. One thing, though, that makes me probably different to other politicians is because of my scientific background, I always try to, any policy we develop, to have evidence-based. And political point of view, what helped me more is to decide in which moment we're going to do that. But I always wanted to be sure that what we were proposing really had a technical, I would say, ground that will really make a difference, and not just anything. And also because I'm not neither a populist nor a demagogic person, and probably also it's because of my family and because being a doctor, a medical doctor, you have to be very serious and because you have people you're in charge of. And the same happens with the president. You have your country you're in charge of. So you need to be very serious.
Thank you. So, as I grew up and got to know my maternal grandmother, one of the things I discovered, she was born in 1917, that when she was born, women in the United States didn't have the right to vote without a constitutional amendment. And I want to ask you, in the context of Chile and maybe Latin America more broadly, but especially Chile, in terms of constitutional development and progress, what is your vision of a full gender equality manifestation in the Constitution?
Well, I would say the Constitution in 1925 probably didn't have much. The one then during the military regime had nothing. And in the exercise that I did during my government, where 200,000 people participated in the discussions, yes, we included areas of gender. Afterwards, in these famous two exercises that were they were not successful in my country during this government, in the first exercise, there was a lot of women's issues, gender parity, a lot of things on terms of equal pay for equal job, etc. But it was rejected by the people, not because of that, but because of many reasons. And in the second exercise, because the majority of the people who were drafting that constitution, in the first exercise, it was a moment in Chile that everybody was very enthusiastic, that they felt that the constitution would solve all the problems. So when people voted, they elected a lot of independent people, progressive people, and only 30% of the people were from center-right or right parties. So what happened then is that this majority wanted to impose a view that did not represent everyone. In societies, not everyone will be happy with the Constitution. It happens always, no? As a matter of fact, the Constitution in 1925, it took 10 years until the majority of the people accepted this Constitution, but we could live with that. But in the second exercise, because people were so angry with politicians, they elected from the far right and right people, the majority. And those who have criticized that in the first exercise, the leftists had decided to impose their model, did exactly the same. They wanted to impose their model. And the thing is that in that model, women's rights were completely, they were undermined. Of course, in a legal terms that if you don't know, if you're not a lawyer, you wouldn't understand it. But it was clearly because they did not propose, they wanted to end parity in the elections, or at least gender representation. They didn't speak about equal payment, equal job, and a lot of things. Of course, people rejected it again, but not because they read it, because probably the majority of the people, and even in the US, I guess, they don't read 300 pages. Because it's not like the Constitution in the US that's very short and even. Yeah? No, in Latin America, we have to have everything in it. So people rejected it because they were angry with politicians. That was the main reason, and from both sides. Huh? So I think there's no appetite in Chile now for a new constitution, but also no appetite for two reasons. First of all, people got fed up with that exercise. They felt that people were more than looking for a constitution that would improve their people's life. They were more interested in discussing between them how to, hit the other one and how to, and they were felt that that was not what they wanted when they were asking for a new constitution, but mainly because we're living in a political moment that for parliamentarians and political parties is not the main issue. First, because now in 1 week we have municipal elections and governors' elections, and of course councillors at governors and at the municipality level. So that's the main interest of parliamentarians now, to choose their mayors, their people who are going to help them in the next year's elections, that will have parliamentary elections and presidential elections. So I think there won't be any appetite for some time. And it depends on the governments who wins next time, that starts in 2026, if that government will be interested in changing the constitution. We have something funny. In the second term, when the majority of the people, they didn't want to change the constitution, to be honest. And there was one guy in the campaign, he said, if you don't want to change the constitution, vote for me. And it was supposed to be people to be elected to change the constitution. But some people didn't like this. They feel very comfortable with Pinochet's constitution. To be honest, today's constitution is not Pinochet's because President Lagos did some reforms. But the reforms that were possible, they're still there. A lot of issues that are not very democratic and that needs to be improved. But let's see what happens in the future.
So you were the first female Minister of Defense. What unique challenges did you face, both in terms of leadership and just your personal experience, did you face in that leadership role?
I mean, I was the first in Chile, but the fifth in the history of the world. I'm not saying that, wow, how fantastic I am. I'm saying how much difficulties for women are in the world to go into traditionally masculine areas. Well, I think I have all kinds of challenges. One challenge is the idea to go into a place that is more masculine, traditionally dominated, and to bring, and me with my kind of leadership, I'm a person who believes in dialogue, who don't shout to the others, that ask, please, can you give me this, can you do this for me? Once, it's an anecdote, my mother called me, and then came my chief of staff, a colonel. And I asked my mom, wait, because she called me for something, and I said, Colonel, please, can you do this and this and that? And then she left, and my mom said, my father was a general, love, are you sure that's the way to talk to the militaries? They're not going to respect you. But the truth is that they did, because what they respected is that I knew the issue, I have studied defense issues, and I respect them, but I can be firm as well. I think the main problems probably is, and it happens to women in any area that women are not being for a long time, is to fight against stereotypes and against bias, if I would say. Because, and also because some people believe in another kind of leadership, because they do that kind of leadership. But you know what I learned also? That you can change culture. In the past, in Chile, nobody will kiss a commander-in-chief when they are in uniform. But I'm a kisser, not everyone, but I mean, in Chile, when we say hello, we kiss each other, you know. And so I started kissing them when I saw them. In the cheek, please, don't get me wrong. And they, at the beginning, they were a little bit tense, but then they got so used to it that when I came into a meeting that I was in a hurry and I didn't kiss them, they're all saying like, what's going on? Is she mad with us?
She doesn't like me.
Anymore, yeah. No, but I mean, those things. But to tell you another anecdote, when I came for the first time, I was Minister of Health, had to go next Monday to the Ministry of Health, the Defense. There was all these militaries there waiting for me to say, good morning, Madam Minister. And I was like, my main problem, everybody said, did you thought on your father? No, I didn't thought of nothing. The only thing that I cannot say, good morning, how are you? I had to have a strong voice. That was my main issue, because otherwise I would look from the beginning like soft and weak. No, but I have to say those things. And we have to, I had a lot of challenges because I wanted to improve women's position inside the armed forces, because at the time, the Air Force had women at the Air Force schools, but in the other, they only have women they were like nurses or lawyers, not in the, if I would say, executive line. So I had to work hard to convince them that for them would be a good thing. But these are the kind of things that you need to continue working, because now I see that not many women are going into the armed forces anymore. So there was much more other challenges, if I would say. But for example, there was this women, they started in the military service, and I went to visit them, and they were working with big, what to call that, guns that you need to put the missiles, artillery. Uh-huh. And then the female artillery group won the men. And then why? And men are looking to me like, okay, don't be so fanatic, But the thing is, the missile, the men will put inside, but women are more accurate. So they can put better when they have to, to aim it? Yeah. To aim it? Yes, they can do it better, so they want that. So it's nothing. It's not that women are better than men. It's that they have certain abilities and certain capacities that are good in many different areas. But I think it was a challenge. But also it was a challenge because I was a woman who represented things that were not so, if I would say, I was a progressive woman. I was not married, and I have 2 children. I was divorced, and I'm an agnostic woman and a socialist. So when my first meeting with the commanders-in-chief, I said, excuse me, I have all the things for you, all the things. But we're going to work well, because I know the issue, I understand the importance of defense, and so we're going to work. And we did work well.
Impressive. So I want to ask one last 2-part question, and it's a broad question. Much of the world is facing increased polarization, political polarization, and associated with that the rise of popular authoritarianism. And I think that's true both here in the U.S. Well, I know it's true here in the U.S. I think that's true throughout Latin America and in Chile as well. How has that affected progress towards gender equality, and what challenges does it present for us as a society now?
Well, I think polarization is very bad because, first of all, it makes people lose confidence and trust in institutions, in political parties, and that undermines democracy. Mm-hmm. Secondly, it's very difficult for governments, when there is a lot of polarization, to go and achieve some things that they promise us during campaign, like reforms and things like that, because when there's so big polarization, the opposition don't want to give any gift to the government, any possibility. And I think the problem with that is that sometimes there are really social needs that need to be accomplished, but because of this polarization, they are just playing games, trying to put traps to the other one. I think that polarization also has the risk of improving violence inside societies many times, and to undermine or to use also certain issues that are important for people. For example, in Latin America, there's 2 issues that are really important for people, probably here as well. It's migration and security. And, they're very complex issues. But you see the eruption of these sort of populist groups, extremist groups, far-right groups, that propose very simple ideas in a very simple language, like it's very easy. We're going to go into there and we're going to solve the problem. And nobody has been able to solve the problem, even governments where they were part of it. But what I've seen is that the world more progressive, liberal, they tend to talk to the people with a brain, with a head. And these other groups, more populistic and demagogic, they speak to the heart, to the emotion, to the fear of people. And I think that's very dangerous because many of these people, I think I'm a Democrat, democratic person, so I believe that everybody can think however they want. But the difference in Latin America now is that in the past, democracy was lost when we have coup d'etat. But now you can choose democratically a leader, and then when he gets up, he makes everything to erode democratic institutions. They intervene the justice system. They intervene electoral system, and so on. Still, they were elected, of course, and they can say, hey, excuse me, I was elected democratically, but they're not a democratic person. So I think that's one of the main risks we have in the region.
And let me ask you, in this country, one of the things that has emerged that this is an extension of this question, if we look at President Trump and Vice President Harris's race, everyone is remarking on how gendered it has become. And more men tend to favor President Trump, more women have tended to favor Vice President Harris, regardless of party. Why do you think men and women can have at times these systematically different reactions to authoritarian populism and other kinds of political values?
Well, I think it's, maybe it's much more complex than what I'm going to say. But one of the things that we have seen in studies that have been done, in comparative studies between Argentina, thinking on Milei, Brazil thinking on Bolsonaro, and Chile thinking in Cast by researchers from the Catholic University and other universities, is that extreme right has some things in common. They can have a lot of differences in some areas, but there are like 2 or 3 things in common. First of all is, of course, the role of the state and the role of the private sector. And they believe that inequalities are okay, particularly economic inequalities. And these are research. It's not only that I woke up thinking that. I agree with this research anyway. The second thing is that security can be solved by a very strong, how you call it, fist hand? Mm-hmm. And that's the only way to respond to security and issues, or to criminality, or to narco drug dealers, or to organized crime. And the third thing is they have a completely lack of understanding, or more than understanding. They're anti-feminist. Anti-women's right, because I'm not talking about feminist and non-feminist. Anti-women's right. And they don't believe in women's rights. They don't believe in sexual and reproductive rights, etc., etc. So you can see women that might agree on some aspect with Doeb, but do not want to have setbacks on their rights. So that's one of the reasons. Still, there are women who, of course, still can vote for even for an extreme right person. But I think there's a feeling for women that there's a threat for them if some kind of leaders are elected, because you see the same in Latin America. But I'm not sure, though, if we can speak on women in general, or we can speak about young women. Because what I have seen in elections in Chile, through the constitutional exercises, older women, they are so insecure, there's so much fear of security, that they could vote for somebody who is saying that they're going to solve the problem, even though clearly don't have the solution. So maybe it's something that needs to be researched, because I don't think that everyone is thinking the same. And if you look at the cases of the different cases, for example, for Milei, the majority of people who voted for him were men, young men, and from low-income It's different than in other places. So I think we need to know better the societies. And one of the things that I've been obsessed with is to understand the subjectivities of the Chilean society, because after the social riots and after the pandemic and any other issues, the Chilean society, and I believe in Latin America, many places as well, people changed. People changed the way they look at the world, but also I think what is happening is that people are fed up with politicians, and they feel that the narrative of politicians is something that it's not close to their hearts and what they need. And I think that the people who wants to go into politics needs to understand better what people are thinking, not to say you are right when they're wrong, but to understand better, to see how they align what they're proposing to what people is feeling. And one of the things that in a meeting we had in Itamaraty, that's the Brazilian Minister of Foreign Affairs, and some researchers were there is an issue as well of perception. I mean, sometimes the reality is not as bad, but because of how the media show things, there is a dissociation between reality and perception. But it's another problem that people, even though you do the things they want you to do, like, build a road or repair roads or build a health facility, they feel abandoned anyway. And in Brazil, they were telling me, look, Lula, continue with this and this and this, and people still would say, but that's not enough. That's not enough. So there is an incredible lack of confidence and trust in politicians. And I think this is dangerous because, I don't trust any politician. I trust some of them. But we need politics in the world. We need politics, and we need to build trust, to be able to regain the trust of people in politics, because otherwise I think democracy can be in danger.
So on that note, do you have any advice for women who want to become political leaders or are considering it?
Well, I think women should, first of all, don't deal with this thing alone. They should sort of get together with other women. I think women that has had experience should mentor women. And the same thing, I think, with SMEs, where women who are just starting, women who already have experience have to be able to train them, to support them. They have to study history, politics, to understand what the country is and what can be done and what should be done. So they have to be well prepared, if I may say. And political parties are not doing their job either on gender issues. Sometimes they do a little thing, but not much. Because in political parties as well, there is a lot of machismo and sexism. So political parties, if those women are part of political parties, should do better on this as well, should support them. But the other issues for women who wants to go into politics is that usually, in the past, if you go into politics, in a campaign is very expensive. And you need to think that banks would not give credits to women for the campaign as for men. So there's a lot of things you need to solve if you want to campaign, because it's expensive. And of course donors and so on, but women still have obstacles on that. They don't have the same opportunities and challenges. So I think, that's why I think that women's organizations should support them. But also I think women's organizations should be supported, because the last figure that I heard is that particularly at the bottom level, women's organizations receive money from donors equivalent at the cost of one F-16 in the world. That was like 0.00 something. So we need women's organizations that be strong as well, because they can be part of the solution. They can support these women who want to go into politics. So maybe saying all these things, if there's something in the room that was interested, we say, no way. No, but it still is worthy. It's worthy because when you can improve people's life, if you can do things that make a difference, I think it's also worthy. But you cannot be alone by themselves, And the other thing that I need to understand, when I was in defense, we had a network of women working in defense. And they had like this magazine, and it says there, We can do all, but not all at the same time. So you need to understand that you cannot be the best housewife. I mean, your home won't be in home and garden, probably. You cannot be the best mother. I mean, of course, you have to be as good as you can, but some sacrifices need to be done. And you need to find a network, people who can help you on this. In my case, my mom was very important because I was alone at that time without husband and you need to understand that there will be things that will not be perfect, but it's worthy. But you need to have the incentive and support of everything. But I would say to a woman who wants to go into politics or wants to do something in life, go with your dreams, with your values. Be conscious that you can do it. Don't let other people diminish your self-esteem, and go for it, because that's an important thing.
Fantastic. Thank you for your lifetime of public service and career. Yes. Thank you very much.